Hey guys, it's Andres, and I'm back today with another video. This time it's going to be part of the Anatomy of a Strength Coach series. I haven't really explained everything about this series and what my intent is, so let me just explain really quickly. What I'm wanting to do with this series is explore some topics that are a little bit more in depth as far as pertaining to strength coaching and programming and things like that. Explaining to you guys different programming strategies or different periodization strategies, or going over some of the programs of my clients in order to give you guys a better idea of just how maybe my mind works when it comes to programming, or maybe the theory behind some of these things, because they can be a little bit confusing sometimes and there's a lot of information out there. So figured I'd just put my spin on it, and so that way you guys can do with it what you will. That being said, today we're talking about training deloads. It's not always going to be sexy. It's not always going to be, these really fun topics that are going to trigger the YouTube algorithm. But I want to put out the information out there for you guys anyways, because I think it's important. So training deloads. This is something that a lot of people get confused about. A lot of people don't really know maybe how to do them, when to do them, why to do them. And so kind of piggybacking off of the last video that I made about intensity and always going heavy, and maybe it's time for you to not lift heavy, this is a good segue into deloads and how they can be useful. So what is a training deload? Basically, a training deload is a decrease in training impulse that you build into a training program over time. Now, that may be something that you or your coach puts or builds into your training program in a deliberate way, or it could be something where you're just kind of forced to take a deload because you got sick, or just feeling really run down, or maybe life gets in the way and you're not able to make it to the gym. Training impulse is just another way to say basically the overall load that you're putting on your body with your training program. It's essentially a break from the normal, whether that means doing less intense training as far as the movements are concerned, or maybe sometimes it's taking a break from training altogether. That kind of depends. I'll explain more on that here in a little bit, but it's just a break from your normal training impulse, your normal training load. Basically, it's like a back off week that you plan out ahead of time, hopefully, or like I said earlier, you just kind of take because it's forced upon you. Why do you do deloads? Well, there's something that we call super compensation. And so when you've been training really hard and you've been putting yourself through some really tough workouts, your body is really fatigued. And we have fitness and we have fatigue. So at a certain point, our fitness is climbing, and so is our fatigue. So they're climbing together with the harder workouts. And at a certain point, we can't really understand how well our fitness has progressed because our fatigue is sort of crowding out our fitness. The more fatigue we have, the less fitness we're going to be able to show. You might have had a time in training where 1 week 315 feels like absolute death, like you're just dragging your feet through the mud, like your feet are in cement. And then there's some weeks that 315 is just flying off of your chest, or flying off of your back, or whatever the case may be. That's sort of the fatigue taking over and masking what our true fitness is. So supercompensation basically is where we remove that fatigue, our fitness shines through, we get a little bit more fit, and so now we are able to display what we're really capable of as far as strength or performance or athletics is concerned. A deload is done to promote long-term adaptation. So you can't just keep increasing your performance week after week after week. You kind of have to take these weeks off or back off weeks in order to have that compensation that I was just talking about. Otherwise, you're going to be constantly in this fatigued state, and you're never going to really see where your true fitness lies. And another reason to do a deload is just a psychological break. So sometimes training just gets monotonous. Sometimes we need to take a break from the normal just in order to feel like a normal person, and get excited about our training again. So with that explained, how do you do a deload? And this is where a lot of people get stuck. And I think that maybe the reason is because people try to follow really hard and fast rules when it comes to training in general, but especially with things like this, because you don't want to do it wrong. There's sort of a fear that if you do it wrong, everything's kind of gone to waste and like you just messed everything up, and what was the point in the first place? There's a lot of different ways to do training deloads. And I might almost say that there's almost no wrong way, as long as that training impulse that I was talking about is decreased during the training deload. So really it's individual. You're going to have to find what works for you, or if your coach is going to have to find what works for you, and that just comes from having conversations with your coach, or having exploring yourself to figure out, you know, what really works for you, when have you felt the best, things like that. But essentially what you're going to want to do is find a way to decrease that training impulse, whether that be through decreasing volume. A good way might be to cut your sets in half. So let's say you're doing 4 sets of 8 reps going into the deload, do 2 sets of 8 reps and try to maintain maybe the same weight that you've been using, but you're doing less volume. Another way might be to just decrease reps. So instead of doing 8 reps, 4 sets of 8, you could do 4 sets of 4. Or let's say you have like a weird, odd number where you're like 5 sets or 3 sets. You can't really cut that in half because you can't do a half set, but you could cut the reps in by a little bit in order to sort of bridge the gap. So you take the total reps done over the whole workout and you can cut that in half. And half is just sort of a good starting place. You're going to want to adjust that back and forth. You might need to take less reps, and maybe 75% of your volume is cut out, depending on how overreached you are, how fatigued you really are, and sometimes you don't need quite as much. Another thing you could do is, and again, this is case dependent, but some people really need more of a break from their lifting schedule in general. Some of you might not be familiar with this feeling, but there are people out there who get tired of lifting weights, going to the gym and doing that whole thing. So if you're one of those people, or maybe you're working with people who aren't necessarily really excited to go to the gym and lift weights every day, maybe their deload actually includes not going to the gym at all. Maybe it means going outside, going for walks, going for hikes, biking around, playing some recreational sports, swimming, whatever the case may be. As long as they're kind of staying active and that activity is lower impact, lower impulse, then it's going to actually have the same effect. So you could perhaps, if you're going to the gym 4 days a week and you're doing like an upper lower split, so you're going upper twice a week, lower twice a week, cut that down to 1 session of each, upper and lower, and then maybe do a session or 2 of just recreational exercise, like the things we just mentioned before. Another thing you could do is just sort of eliminate accessory movements from your workout, from your training program. So just stick to the main lifts, the compound lifts, and eliminate some of the extra accessory stuff you're doing for your arms or for your shoulders, or for whatever body parts maybe that you're not looking to get a lot out of at the moment. Maybe you have them more on a maintenance phase, and you could do that quite easily, or you could just find lower impact exercises in general. So rather than doing a bench press or a dumbbell bench press, you do push-ups, or rather than doing weighted pull-ups, you do the lat pull down with less weights, things like that. As far as when to do them or how often, you're going to want to do them when you can feel fatigue really starting to build up. And so this is where there's a little bit of an art to knowing how to deload. You're going to have to pay attention to certain signs, whether that's decreased motivation to work out, whether that's increased muscle soreness, whether that's feeling a little bit under the weather more often than normal, whether that's just not having great workouts and feeling like you don't have that pop in the gym anymore. Those are some signs that maybe you're feeling a little bit overreached, a little bit over fatigued, and then doing a deload at that point would be a really good option. If you're somebody that tracks metrics like heart rate or heart rate variability, or you do some sort of sports science type of stuff where you're tracking training load and training impulse, there's another tool for you to use. It's something I do with my clients. I have wellness monitoring for them where I kind of track how they're feeling and what their training load is over time, along with some biological metrics that allows me to see whether they are a little bit too far into the fatigue state or whether they're good to go for another week. And so usually I have deloads planned out ahead of time, but if we get to a deload or let's say we get to the week before their deload and their recovery is trash, I might deploy that deload a little bit early depending on what I'm seeing there. The goal with deloads is to try to stay ahead of getting into deep water with fatigue. So rather than being reactionary, where we are deloading because we're just feeling like complete trash and our workouts are gone to complete trash as well, maybe try to stay ahead of it. So like I said, I try to plan out some deloads for people ahead of time based on what I know about them and how long I can push them before they need a deload. I'll plan it out a little bit that way and adjust accordingly. But if you can kind of try to stay ahead of that, you're going to actually do yourself a lot of favors as far as long-term adaptation is concerned. Being proactive rather than reactive in this case. So, there's a lot of different ways to do it. I just kind of went over a bunch of different information on how it can be adapted to you, how it can be different depending on your nature, depending on what kind of sport you're in. I'll mention that, deloads in the traditional sense where I'm talking about decreasing volume or decreasing intensity, impulse, things like that. That's a little bit more specific toward somebody who competes, maybe an athlete or just somebody who's very serious about their training and really loves lifting weights or whatever activity that they do. The deload where it's a little bit more about taking a break from the gym altogether and maybe doing some more recreational activity. That's more for somebody who's maybe not an athlete in the traditional sense. Maybe just somebody who is trying to stay active, trying to improve their health, and so that break from that structure is really good for them mentally and psychologically, and gets them feeling refreshed for their program going forward. So that's a few different ways that you could structure the deload and why you would do the deload. As far as how long the deload should last, a good rule of thumb is about a week. So, a good week's worth of training. For some people, you might take this out to 2 weeks or a week and a half, depending on how hard you've been hitting them in the gym. Things like training age and biological age, and like I said, how intense the training sessions have been can impact how long the deload needs to last. Say for my powerlifting people, there's a lot of times I do like a week and a half or 2 weeks of a taper because their training has been so intense. They really need that extra week or half a week in order to be ready to compete on meet day. And so again, this is where the art of coaching kind of comes into play. You can't just treat everybody the same way. Everybody's going to have to get an individualized plan. All right, so that's basically the quickest rundown I can give you on training deloads and how to structure them, what they're for, how to do them, why to do them. Beyond that, it's going to take a little bit more experimentation on your guys' part. Like I said, finding what works for you, finding what works for your clients. But hopefully this was really helpful for you guys to get more of a complete picture of what a training deload is, how it might be structured, maybe to give you a little bit of peace of mind that you're not necessarily doing it wrong just because you're not doing it the same way you saw it on a Google search or an article that you read. There's some art to this. So take that creative freedom, take that degree of freedom to experiment and figure out what works for you and what works for maybe the people that you coach. All right, guys, so thanks very much for watching. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you're watching this on YouTube. Please follow me on Instagram at The Strength Cave. Appreciate all the love I've been getting from you guys, and here's to continued videos and more support from you guys in the future. Thanks.